One, two, three, four. Oh, okay, we're working. Hey, everyone. Good to see you. Hope you've had a good day so far. I was just in Beata's talk, and that boy's got a lot of energy. I definitely don't have his levels of energy. A little bit of a fact for you. I bumped into him this morning. We got a taxi together. And he did a talk in London yesterday. He got a flight at around 6 p.m., had to connect in Frankfurt, got to the hotel at midnight, and he's turning up today with all the energy. Don't know how he does it. I've got a jitters from coffee still, so I'll be lucky to get through this talk. So have some mercy on me. So yeah, talk about these concepts, things that I use in my work. And a good place to start is this diagram from John Cutler, talking about his perspective on the evolution of teams over the last decade or couple of decades. If anything's not clear on the slides, let me know, and I can read it out for you. So basically, at the top, you've got the different steps involved in building a product. Have an idea, define the requirements, design it, build it, test it, deploy it. In the old days, each one of those was a separate team, and there's an explicit handover between those teams. Over the years, more of those responsibilities have been lumped together into a single team. And now we're at the point down here when we talk about product-led companies, where a single team is responsible for all of those things to a large degree. From having an idea to designing it and building it, all the people in the team are involved. And that's what we kind of mean by product-led organizations with empowered product teams. So if you're on this journey, or you're here in these bottom few rows, there might be something useful in this talk. If you're not, if you're on a different journey, I don't know what to offer you. Hope the chairs are comfy. So I like to ask this myself. Just like to talk to different people and see where they are. And you might want to try this in your company. So basically, asking people to put 2 dots on this nice diagram, a red dot for your current state, and a green dot of where you'd like to get to. And what you can see here is actually quite representative of a lot of the sessions I do. A lot of companies are normally higher up. They've still got some handovers, teams not owning their software in production, requirements coming into a feature factory. But most companies want to get towards the bottom, as you can see there. They do see the value of empowered product teams. And why do companies want to do that? What's the justification for it? I've always found BVSSH from Jonathan Smart as a useful way to frame the benefits of things. And if we think about empowered product teams, BVSSH kind of explains why that's a good thing. So better. Empowered product teams result in better quality software, quite simply because you're incentivized as a developer to create good code. If you create bad code, you have to live with it. You're going to be stuck with it. So as a developer, it incentivizes you to think long-term, not take shortcuts, and therefore you spend less time fixing bugs and rework because you've kept the code maintainable. We then have sooner. Sooner is about getting ideas out to customers sooner, learning sooner. And again, with an empowered product team, the team is responsible for all of those decisions in the value stream. So they can have an idea, implement it, deploy it to production, support it without any handovers. We then get to safer. Safer is about security, compliance, risk, not being in the news because you've leaked all your customer data. And I would say, again, empowered product teams are beneficial in this area because as a developer, you're incentivized to think about all of these different aspects of the code you're responsible for. If you're working in more of a feature factory or a project mindset as a developer, you've got some fixed requirements, you get in there, you implement the requirements, it's the next project. You're not thinking about all the other stuff that's not in the requirements. But as an empowered product team, you are. You own this thing. You have to think about all aspects of it. Happier. So I would say empowered product teams are happier. You've got a stronger sense of purpose. You own something. You're responsible for it. Your input is more widely accepted. You're not just taking instructions. So I would say for a lot of people, that's happier. Not every person likes that. A lot of developers do like to have tickets in a feature factory approach. Then we've got value. How does an empowered product team create better value? in terms of better products and better innovations for your customers. And I would say, again, quite simply, as an empowered product team, the whole team is involved in thinking about the customer and the product, and therefore you get more creativity out of the teams. It's not just me who thinks that. There's been a research, I think this one was state of product management, I think, from a couple of years ago. But what you can see is whole team brainstorming was identified. I don't think this was a scientific analysis, just more of a survey, but a lot of people in the product community think the best way to build product features is to get the whole team involved, that empowered product mindset. If you're familiar with Marty Kagan, he comes at this from a similar perspective. He says, if you're just in this feature factory mindset, where your developers are only writing code and actually not contributing to the product, you're not getting a lot of their value. Developers, testers, people close to the code, close to the software, close to the tech, they know what's possible, and they have a lot of ideas that can be leveraged in this mindset. But the difficult bit's getting there, right? Any company can say, we're going to move to this, product-led approach with empowered product teams, but you don't just get there overnight. There's a lot of obstacles in the way. Firstly, there's your architecture. Your existing software architecture might not allow you to have these decoupled autonomous teams. Then what we see very often is leadership mindset. Are they really ready to say, okay, teams, we're going to stop micromanaging you and let you make some decisions for yourself? I've heard people say yes, and I've seen that actually not happen at all. Very common, I think. What's the third one? And I think new ways of working as well. The teams themselves, they don't just suddenly go from working in a very project-centric way to a very product-centric way overnight. The teams themselves need a lot of support. So here's how not to do this. Unfortunately, this is a very common scenario. This was a CEO I was talking to. I was talking about, let's try and set a couple of teams up working in this way. And then when those teams are working well, you can scale it out to other teams when you've fixed your architecture, when you've proved that leadership can adopt this different mindset, when you've got teams applying these new ways of working, and you have an empowered product team, then you can be a bit more adventurous. But very quickly, it turns into like, you're a consultant, you know team topologies, I want you to tell us all of our value streams, and we're going to do a big company reorg. I don't really recommend that approach. And equally, if you are on this journey to empowered product teams, you have to respect and be realistic about the constraints. This was a company in Germany 5 or 6 years ago, I think, had this 2-day workshop. I was a bit more inexperienced then. I didn't really think too far ahead. So we had this 2-day workshop, did some exploring of their architecture and teams, and I thought, well, this was going well. I might be good at this consulting thing. And then they said, we got this 10, 15-year-old C++ code base with 50,000 business rules, and all of our developers are juniors because no senior developers want to work here anymore. Okay, so all that stuff we just did for 2 days is pretty irrelevant because there are some serious challenges there. You need to take smaller steps. So that's just the caveats and cautions on this journey. It's difficult to get there, but how do you get there? So recently, Team Topologies, been a very popular book. Every conference you go to, people are talking about this. Every meeting I go to, someone picks out a copy of this book and starts waving it like, yeah, I've read it. So is this the answer to all of our problems on the journey to product-led organizations and empowered product teams? Let's find out. Need a quick drink first, though. So what is Team Topologies without all the sidebar? So on the front cover of the book, they're calling it, they don't really say exactly what it is, they say what it's for. It's an approach, I would say it's a toolkit, some principles and patterns for thinking about how you organize your teams. It very much has this empowered product team mindset in there. It fits very nicely with that approach. Yeah, I would say that's the quick overview. And so one of the key concepts in team topologies, you might have heard of this, is stream-aligned teams. So a team is long-lived. That means they own a particular part of the system or a particular product or a particular customer outcome. And that's what we call a flow of work, basically. A sequence of work that results in some improvements to some area of your business. In Team Topologies, they talk about 5 to 9 people. I think that's not a hard and fast rule. It's a recommendation. It's a sensible default. There are some reasons for that. In Team Topologies, in a streamlined team, empowerment is a key concept. Teams can own those decisions from discovery to delivery. Most of the teams in your organization should be a streamlined team. And there are other team types in the book. I won't go into all of them today, but they support streamlined teams. So if you think about this, think about these streamlined teams, what Team Topologies is really getting at is towards these empowered product teams. So it does fit well on a conceptual and a practical level if you're on that journey to empowered product teams. So actually, some people say, oh, what is a value stream? It's not quite clear. There are different kinds of value streams. So what I'm talking about today is a very simple kind of value stream, which is a particular pipeline of work in your organization that results in a certain kind of new features or new innovations being created. So here's a very simple example from the logistics industry. We have the last mile team. Last mile in this context is all about getting your package to the customer's house, that last part of the delivery process. And so this team and this value stream, the team in this value stream is called the last mile team, and they're responsible, they're empowered to discover user needs. The team themselves might be talking to customers. Actually, I've seen companies in this domain, and they've had teams going out and actually being delivery drivers for the day to really get that knowledge of how the customer feels. The team then gets to define their own roadmap and objectives. Okay, there's going to be some negotiation here, but team's largely responsible for saying, here's the company strategy, here's what we think we can best do to support that. We're going to define our own roadmap. The team's then responsible for changing the software, owning the bits of software. In this example, they're responsible for an API, the last mile API, that provides those capabilities. And the team also deploys to production every day and supports that in production. So streamlined teams, pretty simple concept. There are different kinds of value streams. So in this example, what I'm talking about today is a development value stream. It's about developing products or software. So one of the first questions a lot of people say is, and this goes back to the first diagram, if the responsibilities of a team have got bigger and bigger over the years, if we're now expected to do discovery, design, delivery, supporting our coding production, and we're only allowed to have 5 to 9 people, that sounds like a lot of responsibilities for a very small number of people. And that would be the case if we didn't apply some other concepts and principles from Team Topologies, which is platforms. So Team Topologies is the concept of a platform. And through the lens of Team Topologies, what a platform does is it reduces the cognitive load, all those responsibilities the streamlined teams have, like being able to build and deploy software. So a good platform gives these teams a lot of stuff out of the box. I can spin up a new microservice all the way to production, 1 hour. I get metrics, monitoring, logging, reporting, all that stuff for free. It's a great developer experience. So actually, even though the team has more responsibilities, the cost of those extra responsibilities is quite low. And in fact, with a good platform, a team owning deployments and production support themselves might actually be lower and less friction and less stress than that handover that existed before when someone else deployed it. Oh yeah, good product management is required here too. Those platforms can very easily become bottlenecks, a lot of dependencies, a lot of friction, a lot of politics, so definitely not an easy concept to do well. There's also another important concept when people think about Team Topologies. So you look at this idea here. We've got this team that has an idea, deploys stuff all the way to production. Okay, great, that sounds excellent. Let's all have streamlined teams. But the problem is, if we don't design our streamlined teams effectively, if we don't get the boundaries right, we introduce a concept called change coupling. Change coupling, I'm sure you're all aware of this, is where you're implementing some new features or capabilities in your product, and it requires multiple teams to each implement a piece in their part of the software. And now we're dealing with coordination costs. Different teams have different priorities. One team goes slow, blocks the other team. They need to have lots of meetings to coordinate their work, to design how the software will fit together. It gets very expensive when we introduce change coupling. We can't eliminate all change coupling. There's always some dependencies. But if we just go full team topologies, full streamlined teams, without being careful about those boundaries, we can end up in a situation where there's a lot of change coupling that doesn't need to be there. So that leads to the next question. If we are on the journey to empowered product teams, and we do adopt team topologies, and we are aiming for streamlined teams and other team topologies concepts, how do we get those boundaries correct? That's where domain-driven design enters the picture. So what we want is teams that can make changes and innovate quickly. To do that, the team needs to own a loosely coupled piece of the software. They can make changes and deploy it independently, no blockers, no handovers, no coordination. But to eliminate the change coupling, so we can have software with no hard dependencies, no API calls, no shared code, but we can still have very high change coupling. And that's where domain-driven design enters the picture, because it's an approach to looking at how to break your business down into these domains and subdomains, which are loosely coupled parts of your business. It's really analyzing how your business works, analyzing the kind of work you're doing, analyzing your product features, and thinking which parts of our business are loosely coupled. If we start with the business, we can then shape our software and our teams around those boundaries, and that will give us highly independent, streamlined teams, and we can reduce a lot of that change coupling. I don't have a framework for you which says follow these 6 steps in this order and you'll get perfectly streamlined teams, but there is a small mental model to think about here. Where might you start and what do you need to do? So as we talked about, we've got business, technical, organizational, different concerns there. So my advice is start by looking at your business, thinking about what areas of the business would make sense as independent and loosely coupled and suitable for streamlined teams. Then we have to validate those business domain boundaries on a technical level. Will this lead to loosely coupled software, or will it cause lots of dependencies? On an organizational level, would it make sense for a team to be responsible for that subdomain? Maybe it's too big for a single team. Maybe the team that's scheduled to own that already owns other subdomains, and therefore it will just give a team too much work to own that. So maybe we have to split it. And then on a business level, on the strategic side, we have to think about, does this way of organizing our business into domains and subdomains, does that fit with the strategy we're trying to achieve? Are we operating in a single market and staying in a single market? Are we moving into multiple other markets? Are we targeting new customer segments? Are we trying to reduce costs and improve efficiency? Or is it all about growth? Answering those kind of questions can then help us to make sense of, are these the right value streams that we're trying to set up? And once you've gone through that process, got a bit of a double click situation here. Once you go through that process, I would say you've then got target value streams. These are streamlined teams that you think would make sense. Theoretically, you've done the validation, but still, you have to get there. So the hard work hasn't been done yet, because we've got a target to aim for. We still have to transition how to get there. That's very difficult too. So if you're going through this process, and you're collecting all this information, and you're validating your domains and subdomains, you want to have some way to document all that information, something structured that can guide you through the process a bit. And team APIs are quite useful. You can use it for existing teams, but you can also use it for hypothetical future teams. So by collecting all this information about what the team owns, how they're incentivized, how they work, how they collaborate, their dependencies on other teams, you'll then have all that information in one place, and you can say, does that look like a streamlined team we should set up? So I'll now talk about how you can start that process of identifying domains and subdomains with domain-driven design, and in particular, a technique called event storming. Has anyone heard of event storming before? So on the surface, event storming is a very simple idea. Find a nice space. This room could be good. If we can make that wall solid somehow, we've got 10, 15, 20 meters of wall space. That's perfect for event storming. The wall is your timeline running from left to right. You could do right to left if you want. I'm not going to judge you. And then you basically get some orange Post-it notes and start putting them on the timeline in an approximate order in which they would typically occur. It's not hard science here. And what those orange Post-it notes represent are domain events. So in this example here, we've got a scooter rental company. So the first app is located nearest scooter on an app. So imagine a customer or a rider. They want to get somewhere in a city. So they open the app. They find a scooter on the app, then they go to the scooter physically, they arrived at the scooter, they scan the QR code, and then when they scan the QR code, because they're a new customer, the system will say, you need to set up an account. So those are the kind of steps we're talking about here. Steps in the user journey, business rules in the software. We just try and build this timeline of events. It looks very boring and lacking any real excitement here. But actually, in real life, it's actually a very exciting thing. This stuff can go on for quite a few days. Doesn't have to. This example here was an excellent workshop we did, a Canadian company in the finance space. What you can possibly not see on the wall here is an event storming. I think the team built that over the course of a day. It was the user experience of a particular kind of customer they had. There's about 10 to 15 meters, and in this workshop, we had sales, marketing, developers, data science, customer support, products, testers, probably some other people. I think the CTO was there, the CEO was there, and the COO were there as well, and that was good to have their input. And so at the end of the day, we had this timeline, and we had every perspective from the business possible sharing their knowledge about what they understood about how this particular part of the business works. So one of the benefits of just doing that anyway is you learn a lot. People learn about things they weren't aware of. Like, not from this example, but in one event storming session, we realized that the sales team is doing a lot of manual work involving spreadsheets. That happens a lot. And in one example, it was like there's 180 steps in this manual process, and nobody had any idea that the sales team had to do that. The developers had no idea that this complex manual process existed. So just by doing this, you can learn a lot of useful information. But if you're on the journey to product-led teams, it gets even more interesting because you can then start to do this. You probably can't see that, so that probably didn't work as well as I was expecting. But basically, you go through the event storm, and you just start clustering events and saying, what feels like it might be a subdomain? Which clusters of events seem like it would be good for streamlined teams to own? So a very simple example here, going back to the scooter, we might say this part of the event storm is the journeys domain, where a journey's happening. And inside that domain, it looks like we might have 3 subdomains: scooter search, active journeys, and ride completion. At this point, we're just exploring. It's the start of the journey, so it's very cheap and easy to look at different possibilities. But again, what I want to emphasize here is that these events come from all different people in your company: sales, marketing, customer support, developers, This is your collective view of the business. And so when you're shaping these boundaries, you've got all those perspectives in there. It's not the developers guessing what they think is the right way to structure the teams in the business. It's actually everybody's involved in this process. And you might say, well, getting 50 people together for a day or two sounds very expensive. And it is in some respects, but if you're on this journey to create empowered product teams and you're going to change organization structure, I think getting some people together for 2 days is a very inexpensive risk insurance policy. So once you've done that, once you've identified these possible clusters, you can still start to experiment. You can say, okay, we have this pick up and drop off subdomain. Do each of the events in this cluster seem related? Oh, we have an event that's about breakdown insurance. Actually, doesn't feel so related. Maybe it doesn't belong here. So then you can start to analyze things in a bit more detail. And again, the key thing here is you've got all those different perspectives there. If you've got a question about sales or marketing or customer support, they are right there in the workshop to answer things on demand. So if you do go through this process and you are using event storming, even if you're not using event storming, one of the things to be aware of is that there are different ways of identifying subdomains in your organization, different heuristics. There's no flow chart here, but there are different heuristics to keep in mind. First one is very simple. You identify a user journey or a business process, and you say, we'll break this up into steps, and each one of those steps is a subdomain. Search and browse, product details, cart and checkout could be separate subdomains, and we have streamlined teams, one for each of those subdomains. Very often, probably in most businesses, you'll see concepts that appear in different places and don't fit neatly into steps in a process, like the example of notifications here. And then you can decide, does it make sense to have it, maybe some duplication, or should we bring that out into a separate subdomain, a whole separate notification subdomain? We've made these subdomains smaller, but we've now introduced dependencies, so there's always a cost involved here. And then if you're into domain-driven design, you'll know that in DDD, people are very interested in domain language, business terminology, and that's also a great way to think about your domain boundaries. So one of the simple examples is you look for some concept in your business, and you look for the way different people describe it differently or have a different word for it. So a very boring example here is the customer. How do different people in our organization talk about our customers? In marketing, they might call them leads. In billing, we might call them the account holder. In journeys, we might call them the rider. So, okay, we've got that terminology is indicating a different purpose. Over here, this is someone I want to convert. Over here, they're taking a ride. I want to get them from A to B. Over here, my purpose is to make sure they pay their bills and stuff. So terminology, again, a great way to identify good domain boundaries. And going back to my previous point, if you have all of those people in the workshop, in the event storming, you don't have to say, oh, I wonder what marketing calls a customer. You can just say, hey, marketing, what do you call a customer? And probably, to be honest, as you're doing the event storming, you'll already see this start to emerge. Marketing might say events involving a lead. People involved in journeys might talk about a rider. So this will happen anyway. You'll see the language happening before you need to dig into it too much. It is quite a complex topic. Sometimes you also have to evolve the language. You might see an opportunity. For example, all of those people might be using the word customer, and you might say, oh, could we introduce some specialized terminology here? Another heuristic is looking at the different kinds of roles your subdomains can play. So, simple example here from advertising. We've got a campaign builder. This campaign building part of the business is all about helping a customer to decide what kind of advertising campaign do you want to run? What's your budget? What are your creatives? Who are you targeting? And the output of that initial process is a description or a specification. This customer wants to run this advertising campaign. At that point, no real value has been created. The campaign hasn't even started yet. And that's a nice transition to the next kind of subdomain, execution. An execution will take this description, could be a shopping list, could be a task list, advertising campaign, wish list, and an execution subdomain is all about making that happen, turning this request or wish into some value at the end. These aren't the only 3 roles. There are lots of different ones to think about. Analysis is all about, I would say, characterized by receiving various kinds of data and producing insights. Now, I'm not saying you would always split your subdomains according to these roles, but it's another one of those things to look out for. If you're not sure where to split something, if you're not seeing process steps and you're not seeing domain language, looking for these subdomain roles can be another clue. So that was the first step in my not a framework, not a flowchart, whatever it was earlier. Identify those potential business subdomains, and now we have to start validating them from a technology perspective and an organizational perspective and a strategy perspective. So how can we do that? So another tool from Team Topologies is called the Independent Service Heuristics. It's basically a checklist of things you can go through and just sense check and validate and make sure you're thinking about all the different aspects of this streamlined team that you're thinking of setting up. So the first one is a very basic sense check. Could you offer this thing as a service? Is this thing independent enough? And I've actually noticed that question alone, is this thing independent enough, can unlock some deeper conversations. People start to ask, well, what level of independence are we looking for here? What's good enough here for this particular value stream? How decoupled and autonomous could we go, or do we want to go, or is what's good enough here? Then we get to things around cognitive load. So is this subdomain too big for a single team? How about the other things this team owns? Maybe they own multiple subdomains. Would there be lots of context switching here? And then more on a technical side, would this team have to own lots of complex infrastructure? So if there's no platform in place and the team has to own more of their infrastructure, then that takes up more of their cognitive load, so they can own less of a business domain. What I tend to see a lot, to be honest with you, is just teams are just always overrun, to be honest, to varying degrees. But we just like to overload teams a lot. So just always try and be careful and keep this in mind. I think this example here was one of the worst I've seen. So the company was on that journey. I spoke to one of the teams, and I think they owned 2 legacy systems, and there were like 3 developers in the team. And I think I put 10 here, but it might have been more. We've got all these people trying to put work in our backlog. It's like, wow, that is an incredible amount of cognitive load for a single team. They would have no capacity to do any other work, any transformation work on top of that. I think something else here, going back to BVSSH, is the happiness part. We don't always think about this aspect so much, but in ISH, one of the questions in the checklist is, would a team be motivated and enjoy and relish this opportunity to own this particular this particular value stream? Not every part of your business is going to be super exciting to work on. Maybe the product details page isn't that innovative and exciting, but someone has to own it. So with this checklist, you can just start to ask, do we have the right people in the right places? If we've got something that's not as exciting, maybe we can find people who are better suited to that. We can think about these things early. Then we get to the independent aspect. Can a team do most of their work independently? So we need to think about all the things a team has to do. So a team owning this potential subdomain, what are all of the things, all the kinds of work they would have to do? How much of that could they do independently? We might again use event storming to map out the team's process to answer some of these questions. And this is also where Team Topologies has some other concepts that can help. Team Topologies isn't just about the organizational structure. There's also quite a strong focus on how teams collaborate or interact. And they have these 3 different interaction modes. I'm not going to go into this in super detail. Just want to get the key point across, which is by thinking about the interaction mode a team will have with other teams, you can start to get a sense of how much cognitive load will be involved here, how many dependencies will start to appear. And it's the type of interaction that's really crucial to understand. So not all dependencies are equal. So with collaboration, my brain's going a bit blank. With collaboration, teams are working very closely together. Might be having shared meetings, shared retrospectives, synchronizing their backlogs, doing software design together. That's not a bad thing. We just have to recognize that collaboration has a high cost in terms of a team's capacity and their cognitive load. X as a service, on the other hand, is where one team consumes the capabilities of another. Maybe they're calling their API, but they're not having to collaborate, not having to interact a lot for that dependency to remain there. So the cognitive load is low. Facilitating is where one team helps another. I'll skip over that for now. But basically, this is an example from a company I worked with during the pandemic, and we started by doing some interviews, just talking to people, and people were always talking about this integration platform team. You probably can't see some of the details quite clearly, so I'll explain to it. But people kept saying, oh yeah, the integration platform team, they're a bottleneck, they're always slowing us down, they're always problematic. And we were like, oh, going to have to talk to the integration platform team. They actually had a different name. I don't want to say it, but it's kind of funny. Going to have to talk to this integration platform team. So we sat down with them. We did this team topologies diagram, and we started mapping out their dependencies. And they were collaborating with 4 other teams. So, oh, wow. Yeah, no wonder this team's a bottleneck. They're collaborating, spending all their time collaborating, not getting much work done. But as we talked through each of those dependencies, and we were asking, so why do you have a collaboration relationship here? Why can't it be X as a service? Why are you having these expensive relationships? It turns out that the integration platform team were building and owning stuff for those other teams who didn't have the budget or the skills to do it themselves. So this helped us to, by looking at the interactions, not just is there a dependency there, but how are those teams interacting, surface some interesting insights. So there's a couple more ISHs here. I'm not going to go through all of them, just some of the interesting ones. So we've got, will the team be able to own their roadmap? And how does the organization track costs? Again, these 2 heuristics have led me to some interesting insights that I probably wouldn't have got to otherwise, or not as quickly. And in this company, this was an American company, and basically they were kind of in the healthcare space. The company had 1 vertical. They wanted to expand into 2 other verticals. And they were wondering, should we build a platform? So this platform would provide some shared capabilities, some common concepts, not infrastructure platform. It would provide APIs and extract away some of the customer support processes. So it seemed to make sense. It seemed like these 3 verticals would have common needs. So everything was looking good. We were thinking, yeah, this is a good streamlined team. And then we got to these 2 heuristics, and it was like, whoa, hang on a minute. We've uncovered something very interesting here. The company didn't want to give the platform team their own budget. They said, you can only get budget, you only get money to build things from those verticals. So basically, if a vertical wants something, they'll go to the platform team and say, you have to build exactly this, and we'll pay you for only what we want. So the platform team, the potential platform team, would have no autonomy over their roadmap, no ability to think about what's outside of these features we're being asked to build. And that would very much be a feature factory mindset. So as you come across these problems, it doesn't always mean, no, stop, don't do this. It's just, how do you want to handle this? You know, maybe you will accept this problem to begin with, and you'll try and fix it over time. So it's not, it's not like a test and you fail it and you have to stop everything. You have to decide as you uncover these insights, when and how do you want to handle it. And here's something I touched on earlier. As we go through this process, thinking about ways of working again. So this one was after we'd done this transition to empowered product teams. One of the people who was now a platform owner. That means he was a manager for multiple streamline teams that were part of the platform. He used to be more of a project management kind of person, and now he's having this empowered product teams approach. And he was asking, I'm not getting clear requirements from the business. They're not telling us exactly what to build. And I said, can you talk us through this interaction you've had with your business sponsor? And he said to me, yeah, so in this email, he says, what should our priorities be for the next, I think, 6 months or 12 months for the next year, or maybe even a quarter, I don't remember the details. And she said to him, I've got these 3 ideas that I think could make sense, but I'm going to leave it up to you to decide. I'm like, that's great. She's saying you get to decide your roadmap. But he's like, no, I'm not being told what to do anymore. So as you go through these heuristics and you think about teams owning their roadmap, it's also important to think about, will that team be skilled and able to own their roadmap? If someone hasn't been, if someone's been getting requirements and guidance from stakeholders, and now it's like, you own this part of the business, you have to have the ideas, you have to set your own objectives. For those people, it can take a long time to transition to this new way of working. So again, with ISH, you might be thinking, I don't think we've got the people in place to actually do this streamlined team. I think the way they've used to work, it's going to take them time to get here. So then you might decide, oh, we'll transition to that value stream later. We'll transition first to value streams where we do have people in the right place. Or you might say, let's bring in a coach, or let's give them some training. So those are kind of people aspects of that value stream journey. So almost finished now. Just have one final thing to quickly talk about, which is on the strategy side. It is important to think about the strategy, about how you shape those boundaries and value streams. You need to know what you're optimizing for. So in domain-driven design, we have the concept of core, supporting, and generic domains. These are ways to classify your subdomains. So a core domain is something towards the top right. That looks very different to how it looks on my screen, okay? You'll just have to trust me on that one. But basically, a core domain is in the top right-hand corner. It's very differentiating for your business, and it's very complex. A generic subdomain is here. I don't think you can see that. I think it's a bit too faded. And these are things that every business has, payment system, HR system, stuff you can buy off the shelf usually. And then in between there's supporting, which is stuff you need to build, but it won't give you a major difference. So we can use this tool, this core domain charts, to think about our different subdomains and then start thinking strategically, are these streamlined teams we're thinking of setting up, are they most effective from a business perspective? We can then start to talk about how do we plan to evolve these different subdomains. And this is important because when you identify your subdomains and your streamlined teams, it's very easy to think what would be the optimal way to do that for how our organization currently works. But you also need to think about future evolution, as I talked about earlier. So here, we're looking at 2 kinds of complexity. In which subdomains do we want to add more complexity? More complexity in terms of new features, new innovations that will move the company forward. Those are the arrows going up. The arrows going down are where we want to reduce complexity. So you can see this one here towards the middle. It's called domain B. The arrow's going down. That might be some legacy system that's got very complex over time, and we want to reduce that complexity. And this helps us to start sequencing our value streams. I talked about earlier those constraints that exist. So we might choose a value stream to start that avoids that complexity or addresses that complexity. In this example here, this company was wondering, should we do the core domains first? Should we transition to those? Because then we can add some new features there. And that's normally the default approach, right? Build stuff in your core domains, add new features, add new value. But what we could see here was there was dependency on a supporting subdomain. And because it was very complex, it was very difficult to add new features. And so we actually made the case that addressing that first, transitioning to a value stream there first, made sense because we could reduce that complexity, and then adding the features the core domains needed would be much easier afterwards. So mapping things out in a landscape like this, exploring future evolution, you can start to see things like, this subdomain feels a bit core and a bit supporting. Maybe it is, maybe it needs to be split. Gives you another perspective on those possible domain boundaries. And as you've identified those possible streamlined teams you want to transition to, like I said before, it's not a flick of a switch, right? You now have to decide, how do we do this? In what order? Where do we start? Could take years. For some companies, from where they are now to where they want to get to, could be 3, 5, even more years in some really big old companies. So this tool can be quite useful for thinking about what order to transition to your value streams. Bottom right-hand corner, something valuable and something easy. You might pick a value stream, for example, which is something new. We're going to build this new capability, therefore we'll start here. We can get this empowered product team set up very quickly. You've got no legacy to hold them back. Great starting point. But if you do that, you're not addressing your legacy. You're not learning how to migrate your legacy into something modern. So then you're going to be somewhere between the bottom left, which is risk averse, and something top right, which is risk tolerant. And I found both of these approaches are common and problematic. If you start in the bottom left-hand corner, it's a safe bet. You're going to take some part of your system that isn't super critical and you haven't got a huge amount of legacy there. Therefore, your developers can learn about their new tech stack and new ways of working, and there's not a lot of pressure. But the problem is sometimes the leadership and business leaders start to ask, why are we spending 6 months modernizing or applying DDD and team topologies in a low-value part of our company? We want to invest in something big and adventurous. So then you think, well, let's go to the top right-hand side then. This might be, let's go into our legacy monolith. Let's extract some piece of code that's at the middle of everything. It might have 50 dependencies. And if we break that out, we can innovate much faster and add a lot of new features the business are asking for. The problem with that approach is there's so many risks and unknowns that people start expecting, you've promised to deliver some new features. In one company I worked for, they actually did that as the first step of their modernization journey towards empowered product teams. And it took them a whole year to actually get one line of code in production. They hit all kinds of issues trying to connect their new code in the cloud to their data on premises. All these organizational processes about separation of duties. We spent so long just trying to figure out how can we get some code into production. Nobody wanted to own this new process. Nobody would say, I give you permission to deploy to production. So there were a lot of issues. And the problem was the business had put deadlines on some key product work. And it was getting delayed from 3 months, which was the initial estimate, to like 1 year later, still hasn't been done. Not really a perfect solution there, but I think it's important to think about all these things up front. When you have identified those streamlined teams you want to move to, thinking about how you get there, where you start, there's a lot of implications to keep in mind, and try and think about what's best for your organization. And so that's basically it, just a couple of slides to wrap things up. So the reason I gave this talk today was because some companies, quite a lot of companies, not every company, is moving towards these empowered product teams, which I think is beneficial. I see a lot of value in this. We talked about BVSSH, which kind of explains why that can be useful. But to get there, it's not simply a case of let's do a big company reorg. And there's architecture, ways of working, other aspects we talked about. All those things need to be in place. So if you are on that journey, or if you're starting out on that journey, I think there are 2 concepts, and I added the third one here because it kind of touches on the ways of working as well. I think if you read those 3 books, Team Topologies, Domain-Driven Design, and Sooner, Safer, Happier, I think those books can get you a long way, keep you on the right path there towards those empowered product teams. What can you do next? Whatever you want. here's some ideas. Read a book or do an event storming workshop. Give it a try. You might like it. It can be difficult, but it's worth giving it a try. I've also created this Miro board where you can experiment. There's an existing event storm on there, and you can play around chopping the event storm up into domains and subdomains. And you can also play around with the core domain charts. And if you still want more, if that doesn't satisfy all of your needs and desires, I recently wrote a book which talks about all of this in more detail, and have a video training course that covers it. And that's everything. Thank you very much. Questions? Okay, questions.
Nick, do you know how many companies already implemented
No idea.
some examples
Some examples of companies that implemented DDD.
that you know?
Oh, so Payfit. Payfit is a French, I think the French unicorn actually, one of France's unicorns. They're into HR, company payroll, accounting, that kind of stuff. And they're using DDD now. What other companies? My friend Casper, he's working at a company called International Copyrights Services. They do royalty processing. He's been doing a lot of this stuff there. What other companies? So the companies in the picture, I don't want to name that Canadian company. They're doing it. What other companies?
I have seen some in-store apps. It's from the textile range, I think. Do you know what is the name?
An in-store app for textiles.
Differently, the phrase it. This example from the in-store app, from which company?
No, I don't know. Okay, 2 questions. So how did you solve the issue with the integration team being a bottleneck? There was a lot of things to unpack there. I wasn't there for multiple years, so I don't know how things fully played out. The first step is around education. So on a simple level, by using team topologies concepts, we could explain why what they're doing wasn't correct. We could visualize that you're doing lots of collaboration, which is expensive. And we could also visualize you're a platform team, but you're doing stream-aligned work as well. You own parts of those streams. So that education piece was the start. And then what you can put in place is, okay, moving forward, we're not going to do any more of this. If another team comes to you and wants you to build something for them, you have to say no. We have to escalate it to the CTO or whatever. So we stop any more of those bad things happening, and then we have to put in place some roadmap for gradually getting rid of those existing dependencies. That one was a bit more difficult. It was a very global company. Some of those other streamlined teams didn't have the budget, they didn't have the skills, and it wasn't something that they could easily acquire. So those weren't so easy to remove. I don't know how it finally ended up after that. I should probably check in with them, actually. It'd be a good thing to do. If you email me in a couple of weeks, or maybe a week, I'll have an answer to you. I'll check in with them. Who has to moderate event storming? Anyone. I guess there are definitely some dynamics here. So if I had to think about my perfect event storming facilitator, I'd probably say someone who's better at facilitating than someone who's better at DDD. The main skill you want to have in an event storming workshop is someone who can work a group of people. When lots of people start talking, people don't engage properly, people start to argue and there's conflict. You want a good facilitator who can work with people. So maybe a coach. A lot of people say it's good to have someone external, someone who's not in the domain that much. Obviously, that's what I do as a consultant, as an external person. There were some problems with that approach, though, because I don't understand this domain we're modeling. I don't know if some of these conversations are going too much into the details. or if we've missed key things. I don't know how much to push people. So there are some pros and cons to having external people. But there's no real rule. I would say a good facilitator who learns event storming, maybe get some training or watch other people do a couple of sessions, and I think you'll be good to go after that one. And that is all of the questions, so we can now go. Thanks for coming.